Alright guys, perfect. Here we go. We're starting up. State of the game number 1. Today we're going to have TRB, we're going to have Xiphias, SoaH, and myself, BorN. We're going to talk about a few things today, and if you guys haven't seen, we posted the link in the chat. Our topics for today will be the current state of the game, which basically means the version that's not the test map. We're going to talk about the test map also. We're going to talk about the discussion of the layout of StarboMod.com, the matchmaking system, and SoaH is going to be here to talk a lot about that. We're also going to talk about ideas to draw in more viewers, such as ideas for Monday Night Starbo, tournaments, maybe tutorials, anything that basically will draw in a player base and retain it. And then at the very end, we're going to have miscellaneous debates of anything we didn't cover or anything we didn't reach to an agreement with. And finally, we're going to end with callers who want to give their input, because I know that this is only for 4 people right now. In the future, we might have more people, maybe 4 or 5, whatever. But yeah, all right, so I guess we can also pull up the for later we can pull up the test map changes, but for now I guess we can talk about the current state of the game. So I guess we can start with Xiphias, if you want to say anything really quick.
So this is when just to clarify, when you say state of the game, do you mean strategically, or from a design perspective, or like if it's balanced, or everything, or
basically all the things he said, yeah. So like discussion of strategies, metagame, balance, also design, and we're talking about so we're breaking up into two sections. We have the current map, the one that is not the test map, and then we move on to
live
the test
version.
map.
Just call
the live version. Yeah,
the live version. There we go. The live version. Perfect.
Okay, so when it comes to the live version, to be honest, Starbo ever since like the Total Biscuit hyped up back in January, I never felt Starbo's been in a very awful shape. I've always felt it's been like close to a complete product, but it's always been some things that feels that needs to be improved, needs to be changed. And I feel we're still there, but we're also like closer to a complete product. It's kind of weird calling it a product though, because we're not going to sell it, but like a game though, a complete game. So generally, I feel the live version is pretty good. We can have tournaments on it. We have tournaments where we don't see anyone going for some like crazy, super abusive strategy that can't be defeated in any way, shape, or form, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. But there's certain things that we are seeing that I don't like, and I think the Tehredbandit possibly can talk more about this. One thing specifically is that it seems, especially in Zerg versus Protoss, that mass Hydra is basically not just the best way to go, but almost the only way to go sometimes. Just make a ton of Hydras and you'll just be fine. That's just how you do it. And also the fact that bio is very little viable in any matchup versus Zerg is another part. Like, we want to make
It's basically it's only viable against Zerg.
Yeah, only viable against Zerg. Yeah. And like what we want with Starbo, like we want several strategies to be viable at several stages of the game. Of course, you're gonna find yourself in a situation when there's one strategy that's clearly the thing you want to do, but having a game where like you have several different openers, you have several different ways to respond to several different general build orders, is something we're definitely going for.
So TRB, what do you have to say about that? Because I know you have the most experience. You're the best player out of all of us so far. You have any ideas?
Yeah, just going off what Xiphias was saying, there's the live version right now. There's some issues with it. Now my like role in particular that I found myself in with the dev team is not so much coming up with like solutions to the problems of, like, for instance, bio not working as well against Protoss as we'd like. Mine is more fine-tuned into making sure things are working as they should be that are already in the live version. And so, like, in particular, like the example Xiphias brought up, like Zerg versus Protoss, the Hydralisk situation is in a pretty precarious spot, just because the Zergs find themselves a lot of times where Hydras are really the best option, just flooding Hydras and Zerglings. That's because of a lot of different issues. One being unlimited unit selection, unlimited hatchery selection, which is also a very big deal. And those are things that we're not going to take away. That's not even on the table. Like, those are always going to be in Starbow. Those are just like ease of life things that StarCraft 2 has added that people have just gotten used to. And I could personally never see myself having Starbow with like maybe a 12 unit cap per selection. So we have to find different ways around it. And what I do personally is I'll play test. Now, you guys might not see me in the Starbow chat asking for games randomly so much, and that's mostly because I need to find the best person I can practice against, and usually that's against Franskar or maybe against the Korean Zerg. I forgot his name, Mamuri. I've played a few games with him ever since the tournament as well. And so what I'll do is, as I'll see, all right, we come up with a problem, and that's the Hydros, for example, and then I'll focus my play around seeing where the problems are coming from. And so, for instance, after like maybe like 3 weeks of just looking over my games or replays, analyzing them with my players I've played against and with Xiphias in particular, we kind of came to a conclusion with, oh, hey, maybe we need to look at Storm, because if Storm is underperforming, which it actually was, there was a little hiccup in one of our transfers from the 0% patch to the 12.5% patch, and it wasn't necessarily noticeable by everyone, but it was definitely something that I was noticing in all my games. And so now on the going from the live map, now we're on the test map, we're going to test maybe bringing that Storm up, not to completely 12.5% effectiveness, but it will be a little bit more effective, because if we don't do that, if we don't make Storm a little stronger, what we're going to have to end up.
To interrupt, just a second. I just have to leave for like 5 minutes. I'll be right back. Just so you guys know.
That's
okay,
fine. Yeah.
That's fine.
And so, like for instance, if we don't end up making that stronger, what we'll have to do is we'll have to make a unit, right, that will end up combating Hydras a little bit more. And what that'll eventually do is if we have a weakened Storm and we go with stronger units, it's just going to be more and more of just units A moving into A units. And what a thing that we all really like about Brood War is the fact that there's zoning spells, and it's just the question of getting it perfect with the dynamics of the ultimate unit selection, the smart cast, and whatnot, because it obviously is not as easy as just porting the Brood War spell, because there's a lot more dynamics at play, which is like the unlimited unit selection, smart casting, and whatnot. So that's what my average. I mean, of course, I do weigh in on different things within the dev group, but mostly my role in particular comes down to just finding more of the nuanced problems arising in the game, and finding the most efficient solutions possible that won't end up affecting other things as much as possible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. So that was kind of like an overview of what you do and how you arrive to certain conclusions, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess for ZVP, what do you think is a potential an alternate strategy except for Mass Hydra that we can work on?
Yeah. Well, I think the first step is to, and this is what I proposed being in the test map, and it actually ended up making its way into the test map, which I'm happy about, is that we did buff up the tick rate for Storm, because it was ticking less than it should, I believe, and then we also did bump up its damage just a little bit, and so from then, after we can gauge the balance within that, if that does make it to the live version, which I hope it does, if we feel like other facets of Zerg aren't doing well enough and maybe didn't make the transition over from Brood War, then we'll either look at buffing those or maybe possibly adding a different dynamic to the mix.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, also one thing, it looks like your mic is getting louder and louder when you aren't talking.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, do you have auto adjust on for your Skype settings?
I'll check into that right now.
Okay. Yep, there's that static coming in. So can you hear it too?
I think I can hear it. It might be Xiphias's.
It could be.
Under audio settings?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'll take off both of my auto adjusts then.
Yeah, that'll be
okay.
Good.
All right. I just did that. Hopefully that.
Oh, it's still there. It might be Xiphias. It's not too bad, but
Okay. You can remove him from the call if you need to, and he'll come back. He'll just join it back again.
He's coming back. Yeah, I hear him.
All right, I'm back.
All right. So okay. So back to it though. I mean, what are some
Yeah.
alternate strategies that Zerg had in Brood War in ZVP? I know. Okay, so was Mass Hydra the only way or the best way to go in ZVP and Brood War?
No, I mean not necessarily. The thing is, and we try to stay away from. I think we're past the point now to where we want to just have a 1-for-1 ratio transition of everything from Brood War to Starbow, and we know that even if we did that, there would be differences within the engine that would also have discrepancies. But like for instance, in Zerg versus Protoss, Mass Hydra wasn't the only thing that was the best, and I think Ultras were a little bit more utilized in Brood War.
You also had the Zergling Lurker Scourge, which I love to go for that.
Yeah,
where you,
yeah.
Where you
does
like
it not work
open...
it does it not work in Starbow?
No, it works. It works. It's just much harder. Like it requires. Like the thing is, it's kind of interesting because, like you'd have to open with Spire to kill for early Scourge to control the air with Corsairs, and then you'd go into like a third base, and then you have a third base going already when you did that, and then you'd go into like a 5-hatch Hydra-esque style, but then you just use the Hydras to make Lurkers, and you make Zerglings. And the thing about in Brood War, it's like you'd constantly have to make Lurkers from Hydra eggs, and you constantly have to move your army around. But just moving a lot of Hydras around in Brood War was about the same amount of work. But in Starbow, it isn't. In Starbow, moving a ton of Hydras around is super easy, while constantly morphing Hydras into Lurkers and constantly sniping Observers with Scourges and all that is a lot more work because the work is different, but it carries over differently.
Okay, so the reason why Hydras are so prominent in GP isn't necessarily because all the other units are weaker, but because Hydras are a lot easier to control.
Well, there's a lot of factors there.
Yeah, it's a combination of the two, but I didn't want to necessarily stress this point so much, but it really can't be overstated enough just how much Storm affects that matchup in general, because there's a bare minimum, I believe, at which the effectiveness of Storm needs to be at in order for that matchup to really have its full dynamic and effect. And in the live version, and going back to the original question, we're talking about the live version currently does not have Storm packing enough of a punch to deal with the over effectiveness of Hydras, and that's because obviously Hydras are more effective with the smooth AI, the unlimited unit selection. They actually turn quicker as well. If you can look at Brood War videos, they turn kind of slow, they're kind of jagged, they hit each other, and they're wobbling around. And then also, if you couple that with the fact that Storm does tick less in live, and it does damage for around 20 damage less. I can
actually give you some specific numbers
total.
There.
Yeah.
Storm on the live version is 33% slower than it should be.
Mm-hmm. And overall damage is nerfed as well.
Yeah.
And so
that's
if you
compared. Sorry, interrupting you more than. But that's not compared to how it should be with 12.5%. That's how it should be compared to 0%. So if we were to up that 12.5% as well, that's a whole lot. Yeah.
And so with our idea on the test patch right now, if say for example that were to go live right now, even though Storm is stronger in the test patch, it is still actually going to be less effective than it was in Brood War, just to account for the smart casting. So you'll essentially have more time to react to it.
Another thing that's really important about Storm is that Storm is a really interesting spell that we learn more and more about because of Brood War into StarCraft 2 engine. On the one hand, Storm needs to be strong enough so you can hold off a certain number of Hydras early on with only a few High Templars, because the game is so reliant on these fast expansion strategies that needs to hold off these Hydra pressures in order to work, right? But then on the other hand, Storm can't be so strong with smart casting late game that you can just blanket the opponent's army and it's really hard for him to do anything about it. So Storm needs to be positioned in this very fine line between being effective enough very early to deal with these numbers of Hydras, and then still being slightly nerfed because of the incredible usefulness of smart casting in the late game with a big high Templar terrain. So it's a very fine balance to have there.
But the good thing is that the design is there. All that matters is just adjusting the balance, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
that is there is some magical number in there somewhere, and I'm pretty sure that magical number will feel like a stronger storm than people are used to, and I'm pretty sure people will look at that storm and say this storm is too strong. But I think that's actually the strength the storm needs to have, and then we'll just have to perhaps balance some other things around that. But it's so important for that storm to be strong enough to actually deal with those numbers of hydras early on. It's
really the linchpin that holds the whole matchup together. It's based around the storm dynamic, and that's the kind of the steps we're taking. In that matchup, I guess, in particular, most of our discussion revolves around Storm as of late.
Okay, so overall, ZVP is in a... Oh, well, I can't say I'm getting loud again.
That's so weird. Oh, this happened... I don't hear it, but this happened when I was casting with Supernova Maniac in the Beta Invitational as well. Where when he got louder, things just got distorted. But that was his automatic adjustment levels in Skype that was messing up.
You know, it could be me actually. It's like when only I'm talking, I'm the one who hears it being louder and louder. It's on my end.
Yeah, check if you automatically adjust your microphone settings in Skype.
Yeah, I definitely have that checked off right now.
Huh, that's really weird.
Yeah, that is really weird.
Xiphias, have you ever had problems with this when you and me are just talking individually?
No.
Okay. I just want to make sure it's not me either.
Well, if we just keep talking, so you're going. You know what? I'm gonna take over the host role for a second. I'm just gonna throw the ball out to SoaH there. SoaH, what do you think about the current state of Starbow? Because you're just being so quiet right now. Sorry, you're eating. I'm sorry I interrupted there.
Yeah, I mean, he's been awfully quiet, and I know he's mainly here because he's gonna talk about the Starbow.
I know he is. I just wanted to include him a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, that was whoa. I haven't been playing much lately, so there's not much I can say into the game. What we were talking some time ago with new ideas and how to take into Zerg, giving new options in the late game and opening the late game, I think should be a good way to look into. Because we all know that the early game has a lot of options, even though some are better chosen to, and even though that's big or not, the late game is the focus we should start having, because sometimes it feels like once we get into late game, from the Zerg point of view, because I'm not sure from the others, it's almost always Defiler and whatever you've got from the mid game.
That's a very good point that SoaH brings up, though. And that is something that we have been talking a lot about lately, because a lot of the changes we have been making lately has been early game or mid game changes, and it's not because we've chosen to focus on it. It just kind of happened to be what we've been working on. So a lot of people have suddenly noticed that and suddenly been like, "Hey, you guys need to focus more on the late game instead of the early game all the time," because changing the early game changes the game so much more than changing the late game. And so that's something we started thinking about more, and that's why we are testing things like the Dark Archon and things like that in the test map, is to try and add some stuff to the late game instead. On the other hand, it is important to remember that if you want to build up the game, like, the early game is the way to get into the late game. So setting the early game stages first is kind of important, because then we know what kind of late game we have to build into. Just saying.
That's true. And just to comment on what you're talking about, adding some things onto the test map and having discussions about more late game units. I think it's healthy, because not only, like, for instance, the Dark Icons in the test map right now. Now the if we end up putting in a live version, it might not look exactly like it does right now, but what it lets us do is we can hop on there, we can play some games, we can see how the late game kind of feels, and then we can say, like, oh, this kind of thing that the Archon has, it feels really cool. Maybe we're going to leave that in there, maybe change it around so it fits into the Starbow universe. But then also at the end of the day, maybe some things just don't jive that well. Maybe it kind of lets us have more of a creative experience, and that's usually what the test map is about.
Well, I would like to point out the fact that I think it was Kyriak that commented some days ago that in the last days or in the last weeks, some new ideas were proposed, some new solutions were proposed, which reverted some of the problems that were before. I can't recall what was it exactly, but it was a really nice point to take into account because as long as we evolve, there's some things which were a problem before and would not let, let's say, for example, dark archons to be implemented because they have no space or they were overlap other units. But as the game evolves, those places become defined otherwise, and maybe new units can come into play, and new ideas can come into play.
That is a very good point because there is a reason why there are no Dark Archons in Starboard right now. There's a reason why Cabell chose to not put that unit in there. But since that time, this game has changed quite a bit. So now there might be room for one. Like I'm just using the Dark Archon as an example here, not like saying like. And that's another thing that's always so difficult when developing Starbow, is that a lot of times when we look at something that's in the game, it's been in the game for a very long time. We just have to scratch our heads and say, why would Cabell put this into the game? Because right now, like, we can ask him sometimes, of course, but like a lot of times we're left a little bit in the dark there, which makes this a little bit more difficult than if we had actually started making this from scratch ourselves.
Yeah. And then another thing, like I'm under the impression, this is kind of just my philosophy. And I don't know if it'll end up ringing true at the end of the day when we're all said and done with Starbow, but I really feel that we can take a Brood War, obviously, and take the units from it and modify them if need be to transfer over to the Starbow universe. But I also believe that there's room for both old and new units alike. And so for the Dark Archon, for example, I'd really like to see, obviously, maybe with its final stats adjusted a little bit to fit into the Starbow universe, I'd love to see that unit make its way in. But then also, I'd love to see different units make their way in too. Like, obviously, the Stalker has made its way in. It's currently in the live version. We don't have any plans to take it out. But I think that's just, I think the Protoss race in general is a great example to how we can take a race from Brood War, roughly copy it over, right? Keep the fun dynamics about it, but then also add on cool new dynamics on top of it. Like for example, the Nexus Recall, right? Off the top of your head, when you first transfer over to Brood War to Starbow, you can think to yourself, "Oh my God, that's so imba," but it's really not, because it takes chrono boosting energy away from the Protoss if it utilizes it. But it's also kind of a flashy, cool move that the Protoss can use into the early, mid, and even late game as well. So I think, at least when I'm thinking about cool things that or additions that could be to Starbow, I'd like to look over the Protoss race and see how good we've done with that race so far.
And it's also important to remember that Protoss can have imba changes, because that's part of the Protoss race, is to be imba. So yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's focus back on the.
BorN, I can't.
Oh, BorN, I can't hear you.
No, we can't hear you. The static is gone because BorN muted himself. I can hear him like very, very far away.
I can't hear him at all now.
He's like in the bottom of Grand Canyon, and I'm at the other side of the world.
Is that a good thing?
He's reborning, don't worry.
You got to turn your mic up.
Bam!
BorN.
How's that?
There we go. There we go.
Okay. All right. Okay. So let's refocus back on the live version.
Yep.
So what are some things, TRB, that you saw that were maybe wrong with the live version? How about Sentinels? Is that an area of concern?
All right, well, the Sentinel is definitely something we've been tinkering with over the past month. One of the main reasons we ended up wanting to kind of look at some possible reworks was the way it was affecting early game Terran versus Protoss, and the fact of if the null war was around too long, then it kind of like choke up the Terran. He has to stay in space for a long time. If the timer was too short on the unit, then it might use its viability a little bit. So we kind of wanted to play around with different ideas. We ended up coming to the conclusion, I think the live version right now has the auto turret incorporated onto the Sentinel. And it is still a unit that we're actually actively discussing. We actually actively discussed it about an hour before we join this call. And we have heard the outcry from a few people that they said that they liked the null ward, and we were actually discussing a few ways in which we could re-implement the null ward, but still take away some of the negative effects that it was having in the early game, Protoss versus Terran to begin with. And I think we're actually having some pretty good progress.
I would say so too. We can leave that for the test map discussion, but I guess moving on. What are some current issues with the live version that you can see? Anything else?
Okay. Yeah. Some current. I guess I could call them issues. No, the thing is, all right. For example, let's see. I do feel like sometimes units are a bit, maybe a little bit too big in Starbow, and this might come across maybe a little bit more of a nuanced thing, maybe not something that is drastically on everyone's mind all the time. But I do feel like that the units of Starbow are too big, and maybe in a couple of test patches from now, is something that I'll be working on is just maybe seeing what it would feel like if some of the units were scaled back just a little bit, because I feel like especially when the late game comes around, and especially when armies pass like that 130 supply mark, you can really feel like navigating some of the chokes and corridors around maps is maybe a little too clunky with how big the units are.
Which units in particular?
Well, Marines or Dragoons come to mind first and foremost, and we actually did do a test earlier today, and we did find out irrefutably that units in Starbow are actually substantially bigger than units that for example, were in Brood War. And we used a couple of different methods of measuring, because obviously 1-to-1 ratios aren't always the best way to go, just with because maps are obviously different, unit sizes are different, and then you got to take the engine into account as well. But yeah, we did conclude that at least on those two units, and probably the rest of them as well, they are quite bigger, and we might look to just scaling them back a little bit to allow for a more epic feel across the map.
I see.
It is really difficult to talk about issues with the live version without talking about Testmap, because the Testmap is the way that we deal with things we feel are issues with the live version.
Yeah.
Another thing, I see Kierak is posting Overseer in the Twitch chat, and that's actually a really good point. The current Overseer, does anyone? And this is straight from the Red Bandit's mouth, but I'll say it anyway. But does anyone remember Eye of the Beholder from Warcraft 2? That little eye that just flies around really, really fast.
I think it's I have Kilrog, my man.
Oh.
Yeah, I remember that. Oh, that's what you guys were aiming for, huh?
So right now, when you upgrade the speed on that Overseer, it's small, it's fast, and it's very fragile, and it just flies around there.
Yeah, he's actually extremely fast when you get the speed upgrade. Like,
yeah, he is.
It zooms around like crazy.
But I agree that the current Overseer is in a really weird spot. I also think I didn't change the tooltips. I even think it says when you morph it that it says that it's going to detect, and it doesn't. So that's really, really horrible. But the Overseer is most probably going to change quite soon. And well, there's a whole lot of stuff that's going to change. I'm not going to get into all of that. But
I'll list that for the test map discussion part.
Yeah,
or we can actually talk about it now because it's not in either version.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but
just real quick, Xiphias, I just want to say the Overseer change in the last patch, and I know this is an excuse, but it did come towards the end of a session of a previous test map, and so we were kind of antsy to push forward the update. Yeah. And we were most antsy about pushing forward the detection on Overlord update, because it, once again, going back to the overabundance of Hydralisks in Zerg vs. Protoss, it actually was a very good step in the right direction considering those strategies, because essentially what Zergs were doing, or what they could do, what was available to them, is that they could just mass Hydras, morph that really quick Overseer, and then totally negate any detection openings, including Dark Templar, of course. And so it was, essentially a direct result because we were sort of just antsy to push forward that update the most, and kind of left it in a weird spot in between a few different thoughts.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So
But
actually,
the most important change there was that overlords detect and overseers don't. Not exactly what the purpose of the overseer was going to be.
Yeah.
The purpose of the overseer is still heavily discussed, and I'm just saying we might just not. The overseer might be a superficial unit. Like it might be a unit that it's not there anymore in the next patch. We'll see. We don't know yet though.
but I will say I do like the Eye of Kilrog thing. That's a pretty good idea. Something that's really fast moving, has low range, low sight range, and also low HP. I think that would be pretty interesting. It's like a really risky fast scout.
Yeah, it is. It is in the live version. The problem with it though is that it's very counterintuitive. Like you're used to the overseer being big, buff, has these eyes, can see far. Like it's a very counterintuitive thing for a StarCraft 2 player to face though. That's one of the issues. At least.
I see. Or yeah. I mean, I'm also thinking about. I've also have like a few ideas about. You know how like the Spider Mine has only 3 set. Okay, no, Vultures only have 3 Spider Mines, right?
Yeah.
I think if we were to use that more often, maybe like an Overseer that has maybe like say 1 or 2 IF Kilrogs that it shoots out, that could be something. But
yeah, we actually.
As a matter of fact, I'd like. Go ahead, Xiphias.
Yeah, no, we did run that on a test map where we had an Overseer that could send out a flying locust.
yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. It cost energy and it didn't have like a certain number, and we could have maybe tried like a certain number.
I really think it's too soon to write off the Overseer in general. The only reason it got kind of complicated is just because it shared so many interactions with detection and then overlords and then subsequent every other invis unit on the map, because overlords are such a critical part and detection is such a critical part to every game that it kind of just left it in a little bit of a middle ground of a few different ideas. But I still think there's a few different ideas, especially the Eye of Kilrog, maybe even going with some maybe limited spawn ability like Vultures have with Spider Mines could definitely be places we can go with the unit.
Mm-hmm. I had an idea for that somewhere else, but I remember it. It was for some crazy idea that you guys might like. I don't know. Okay, so what were we just talking about again?
Live
version, Overseers, subsequent detection.
Marzipan is really good.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, and also Overseers are complicated too because of the supply they offer. So it's one of those things that can be massed in infinite numbers. So it's hard to we know that we can't really give it attacking or damaging abilities. So that also complicates the design of the Overseer a lot too.
Yep. That is.
It really does. And if you want to talk about unintuitive, now a lot of times you can sort of argue for something being unintuitive and not unintuitive, regardless of, depending on where the new RTS player might be coming from. But regardless of where you come from, there's always kind of like a supply. And I don't really think there's ever been a unit to where once you make it, it is a supply, and then once you morph into something, it has negative supply. So it would be really tricky to even kind of get into a spot where people would even understand it.
Yeah.
Off the bat.
We could like another. Okay, I'm just theory crafting here completely, but like something we could do is to have like some other Zerg units spawn like a little flying locust instead, and for the same purpose if it needs some scouting at some point in the game. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't
could
have
even
to
be like a queen ability.
Yeah, a queen ability or infestor ability or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, looks like we're getting somewhere. All right. So another thing is, I know there's been a lot of talk about how Zerg needs a flying spellcaster, and I actually totally agree. I think it would add a lot of variety. Like all races have some kind of flying spellcaster, right? Yeah. In some way, yeah. I guess you can say the Devourer is the only quote unquote spellcaster.
No, you can't even say that, man.
Sort of, but.
Plague plus Devourer, against Bio might be, something to look into. But Xiphias, I know we were actually kind of discussing something along these lines.
Yeah.
Would you mind? Would you mind if I throw the idea out there for him?
Yeah, sure. It's kind of funny because we just talked about this like an hour and a half ago, and you just say it now.
So essentially, it's something that will probably be making its way. If it's not this test map, it will be the next test map for sure. Is that we will be giving an upgrade to infestors that on Hive Tech will allow them to burst forth into the air and they will also be getting a spell. It probably will be spawn broodlings, but we will be looking into giving it possibly some other spells to give it more of a unique feel to the Starbow universe. But at the end of the day, if nothing else ends up working out, we probably will go with the spawn broodling to give Zerg something to maybe have a flying aircaster, and then especially in late game turtle situations, they will be able to utilize that unit to maybe pick off some high value targets if the other player is just kind of sitting behind a wall of defenses.
So if we were to get there, do we have any idea of what the spells would be? Like, what are the spells that would be on the Infestor, and what are the spells that would be on the Viper?
Well, also, just to throw it out there, it will not have Consume, just saying that right off the bat.
Thank you.
It will have the Viper model.
Oh my god.
We will use the Viper model.
And actually, yeah, the energy... we're actually going to go the opposite direction of Consume, because we were discussing this. It might not be something we go with in the end, but instead of it costing resources to morph it into the next level, obviously you'll have to purchase the upgrade once you get to Hive Tech, but then actually to morph it into something, it might not cost, and we might go with this route, it wouldn't cost resources to upgrade, but it actually cost energy on your Infestor to upgrade it. And so you're going to have to make kind of this cool decision in the mid game of, hey, do I want to utilize my Infestors for their energy right now and then have to wait longer in the late game to kind of get that energy built back up? Or am I going to kind of sit on them, right? If my enemy doesn't move out, I'm just going to kind of sit on them, make them an investment. And then once I get that Hive Tech upgrade, then I will birth them into the air, and they will flutter around and do all sorts of cool things.
But hold on. This is an idea that I also had too, and I was talking about thinking about exploding Infested Terrans.
Yeah.
Okay, instead of making it cost energy to morph an Infestor into a Viper and keeping it on resources, one thing that could be really, really cool is if you have Infestors and Vipers synergize with each other. So what you do is you cast a spell with the Infestor, you quickly morph into a Viper, and you cast a spell from the Viper that synergizes well with the spell that you casted from the Infestor.
Well, that would have to be a really quick morph.
Yeah,
that's a very theory crafty statement.
But it could be something. It could be something.
It could be something.
See,
I mean, what you have actually tested in the past, Franskar made a test map a long time ago where you had sentinels that could cast spells on each other, that they made like an energy core between them, and if anything got hit by that core that was between them, then that stuff happened. So you had like the two spellcasters synergizing that way, and stuff like that can be interesting. But it's I like Starbow as little gimmicky as possible. But yeah.
Oh, quick click.
And one thing I do like to stay away from when suggestions come up in the dev team and in my own suggestions as well, is I would really like to see like if the Infestor ended up becoming an upgrade to another unit, I wouldn't necessarily want the units to have a totally different spell kit. Now, I would like to see one have an upgrade over the other, but I don't know if necessarily having them have two different spell kits. I mean, if that's the case, maybe we just make two different casters.
Okay.
The main thing I really like, I understand we should leave this subject soon, but the main thing the main idea I really like behind this is that you have a set of spells on the Infestor, and they work a certain way. And then you upgrade it to a Viper, and it should have a set of very similar spells. It should keep some of the spells, maybe get an extra one or two. But the core idea that I love is that those spells will feel very different when it comes from an aircaster, because when you cast something from the air, you can attack from completely different angles, you can harass at completely different locations. And the Infestor is not just a ground unit, it's also like a burrowed harasser, so it acts completely different. And that's just so good design in my head, that you can have few spells, but the impact is so different. So for the player, they don't have to memorize all these different spells that Sir can have, but they have to watch out for now he can suddenly come from the air, and have to think differently that way instead of playing like, okay, I haven't played that much League of Legends, but I'm pretty sure when you play like Dota or League of Legends, you have like a ton of heroes and spells you have to remember what can be used against you.
Yeah,
and
it's really it's about
what we don't want.
Yeah, it's about complexity from simplicity. Is how I'd like to look at it. And the simpler you keep it, or the more simple you keep it, the more simple it is to balance. But then also you can get the complexity from the simplicity as well. So I think that would probably be good. I mean, that's usually what we're trying to think when we're thinking of ideas for Starbow and the direction it's going.
Okay, so it looks like we I guess we could move on to the test map and explanations for the certain changes that you guys have made.
Sure.
You guys really want to?
Well,
No. Keep in mind, I did watch the video, and actually,
Okay.
it does. I can see where you guys are coming from too. So, and the concerns that I did bring up, I mean, personally, you guys have mentioned that, and you're like, yeah, that could be a potential problem. So, honestly, I'm not too worried about a test map discussion, but we could open up the link and we can start talking about mercs. I guess that's one thing we could talk about really quick.
Sure.
That's fine. Yeah.
Oh, and so if you ever have to go, we can always throw you onto web development and then things like that. Okay, cool. All right, so we
Yeah.
can talk the merc.
Yeah, one thing I just really like about the Merc is that, like, we've been looking forever, or off and on, we've been looking at what can we give Terran Bio to make it viable versus Terran Protoss, not make it like viable in a sense that I just make a ton of bio units and I just attack and win, and
AKA
still
Marauder.
aka Marauder, and also make it so lurkers are actually a threat still in TVZ, aka Marauder again, and the idea of the idea of the Merc, or Herc or whatever from Legacy of the Void, where
Yeah.
you have it's kind of both a ranged and a melee unit at the same time, because it can grapple on from great length, but it exposes itself as it does it, and it's so intriguing because it adds the properties of the Marauder when it comes to something that can hit hard and tank and do damage to like tanks and Dragoons. But at the same time, it's really vulnerable to things like lurkers because, first of all, it can't grapple to ground units. And second of all, it has to go into the lurker's face to shoot it. And that's really vulnerable for him compared to Marauder that can stand far away. So we've seen like a lot of different variations of these units. We tested some of those variations, but just the plain vanilla one we started with, where it does damage on impact, or almost started with, just seems to be the most solid one for now. But the general concept of this unit, I'm just starting to like more and more.
Okay. So now we can talk about well, unless you guys have anything to input. TRB, you have anything about that? So,
Yeah, I just like to say that it's a unit I'm excited for as well. I would like to let everyone know that obviously when we take something this new and even its core design is within the StarCraft 2 universe, it obviously is going to take a little bit of tinkering for us to eventually get right. So still be looking for the unit. It's something that I know a lot of times on Testmap, some things are disregarded, but that unit in particular is something that we'd really like to keep around, and we'd like to see it always stay in Starvo. So if we do some tinkering on the Testmap here and there, don't be scared. It's definitely staying around for the long haul.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I've also played against the Merc. I don't necessarily use it a lot. But in TVZ, I actually think it's really quite interesting to play against. And also the grapple hook range. What do you guys remember what the range is on the?
It's 7, and then you can upgrade it to 9.
Wow, that's a lot. Whoa, okay, that's crazy. I didn't know there was an upgrade. Is that a new thing?
No, we had that fairly beginning. I called the upgrade extended cord because it makes sense.
I see. Oh, extended cord.
You just call it extension cord.
Yeah, I guess.
Hook shot into long shot? No, I'm just kidding. Anyways, so, I mean, what I initially, I thought it was only like 6 range, but anyways, it is kind of interesting because
it's 6 range on Legacy of the Void, I think. No, they say it's 6 range, but the Legacy of the Void map I got from the Legacy of the Void group had 7 range on it, and we kept it and we tested that, and it felt better than 6.
I see. Well, from a TVT perspective, it feels like, yeah, they're really, really good against siege tanks. And I was thinking that maybe like the proper position of buildings would help deter mercs. And yeah, they definitely could, because setting up a supply depot wall, first of all, you don't want to just suicide your mercs in because you don't have your marines or whatever any other units supporting your mercs. And it was interesting to find out that they can actually grapple over buildings.
Mm-hmm.
So.
But this is important. Like, yes, they can grapple over buildings, but again, positioning is, and this is why I find them so intriguing as well. Even with this grapple, which seems to defy all geometry on the map and building placements and everything, it seems to just you just gotta move on no matter what. Positioning is still really, really important versus the units because they're very susceptible to certain other units. And I did show some pictures I did make some pictures in the forum thread about different positionings of siege tanks and what would be good and what would not be so good versus mercs. But like, let's say you have a supply depot wall. If you have a siege tank about 10 range away from that supply depot wall in siege mode, the mercs are not going to get to that. But you need to make sure your siege tank is a little bit further away from the wall than you used to, and they're still going to attack the mercs. But at the same time, they probably won't be attacking the marines behind them. So now you're going to have to think a little bit about maybe you should have some siege tanks further in front and then some in the back to back those up. Have vultures next to the siege tanks instead of in front of the wall to protect the siege tanks instead of protecting your wall. Like you have to think differently with this unit. You have to keep zealots next to your dragoons instead of in front of the dragoons because you want to attack right as the mercs hit. Like it messes with how people are used to think and move units around, and I think that's actually a good thing as long as it's kept to a certain like state, as long as it doesn't go crazy, which is a bad choice of words, but whatever. But like, as long as it opens up for new gameplay and strategies, and it also opens up for your opponent to think differently. And if a unit that we add doesn't really open up for anything new, then it's just a useless unit, in my opinion.
I see. So it seems like one of those units that we really need to do a lot of testing on.
Yes, definitely. This is one of those units that people really got to get used to both using and playing against, and I think it will be figured out. One thing I don't like about the Merc, there's a slight thing I don't like about it, and that's it gives you the bio feeling from StarCraft 2 a little bit. In that sense, I say if you play Protoss, you have this feeling that if there is a bio attacking me right now, I'm just dead. That kind of feel. Like if they hit this particular timing, I'm just dead. I don't know if that's true, but that's kind of the feeling you have. You don't really have that same feeling versus mech because you always feel you can delay a mech push to a certain extent with some good Dragoon placement. I feel with the Merc that's a little bit negated with the delay of a push the same way. That's the one part I dislike, but we're gonna see how this evolves. But it's not like a huge bad thing, though.
So was the upgrade for the grappling hook range a new thing, or has it always been there?
No, that's been there. In the test map, it's been for a while.
Because 9 range on paper to me sounds really intimidating. I mean, that's a Colossus, right? So I don't know.
Is Colossus 9 range?
Yeah, Colossus is 9 range. So it's.
I don't compare to StarCraft 2 units because it doesn't. Yeah, but yeah.
All right. So you have anything to say about that?
Me about 9 range?
SoaH? Or no, about
SoaH.
anything? Because he's
He's
sitting there
here.
looking awfully quiet, modeling.
We should definitely start talking about the website after this so he can say something.
Yeah, we will soon.
Well, yeah, I actually have nothing interesting to add to this conversation. That's why I just listen and learn.
Oh. Well, there we go. A scholar.
Thank you, you're a neutralist.
It's like Switzerland. Allied with everyone, neutral to everyone.
Just give me the money and don't worry about.
I have no strong feelings one way or another. Okay.
Alright, so let's go. Dark Archon with 100% Brood War stats, except for Maelstrom, is a little smaller and does not last as long. So yeah, I know we talked a little bit about this, but what made you guys bring back the Dark Archon?
Alright, I'll take this one.
Okay.
So essentially,
I want to say something about it later though, but I'll let you talk first.
yeah, what made us bring it back is that we thought to ourselves, are we being prejudiced against this unit for a reason or for not really a reason at all? And so we figured we might as well throw it in the test map, see how it feels. Now there are some people that think maybe Maelstrom is bad for the game, and maybe some people think mind control is bad for the game, or maybe some people think feedback's bad for the game. But if you've had experience with StarCraft 2, and you might be thinking to yourself, "Oh, feedback's going to be just like it was in StarCraft. It's going to kill all my ghosts. I'm going to be able to EMP." Well, the matchups they're completely different with the Brood Lord baseline, and then also you got to take into account the Starbow feel to it as well. Mm-hmm. So what we did was we did take it. We put it in to the test map. We Starbowized it, right? We took the Maelstrom, which actually subsequently has much less of an AoE effect than it does in Brood War. And actually, after you cast it, it does have, I don't even know what it would be considered, but after you plant it on the ground, it still has an activation timer on it as well. So you cast it, it's out there. It also has an activation timer of maybe about a second. So then it's also harder to land as well. So we did take it. Yes, we do understand a lot of people might have some bad vibes about units such as that are in StarCraft 2, and namely make like a Sentinel, which will stop your units from moving. But we do need to take into consideration. I believe that this unit is obviously a tier 3. It is essentially the biggest tech choice anyone can make in Starbow in general. Maybe outside the carrier, but even the carrier, I feel like, is a little bit more easily accessible than the Dark Archon is. So it is strictly a late game unit, and usually only would see a lot of use in the PvZ matchup. And the PvZ matchup is something that we're looking to add maybe a little more color to towards the late game. Of course, we were talking about Hydras earlier, but no, that's mostly like early to mid game type stuff. And it did come. It came at the point maybe around a month ago we started talking about it, when we were starting, or at least me in particular, I was starting to think, all right, there's a lot of stuff in the past that we've thought about. All right, early game, all right, mid game, we're adding a lot of early game units. Let's start to try to look towards the late game. And also, I thought, even if it ends up falling flat on its face, it can at least give us ideas as to either what we don't like or what we do like about adding certain units into the game. And the cool thing about the development process is that, yeah, you can add something in, it might not work out, but at least you know, right, why it didn't work out or why your ideas of didn't work out. And so you can kind of go and pick and choose from there. But I really do think that the fact that it has been Starbowized a little bit in its implementation, it can definitely lead to some cool situations, and especially it being a late game unit, mostly geared towards the PvZ matchup. I'm not saying you can't use it versus tier versus another P, but I think that can go a little bit towards validating the fact that it can lock down units a little bit, especially when late game PvZ comes around. You got so many Zerglings running around, especially since it's a smaller AoE than Brood War. I don't really see it maybe carrying that effect of people from maybe StarCraft 2 that are afraid of that Sentinel block where you literally can't move all of your army that you built the first 10 minutes of the game. It's not going to be like that at all. The unit shows up so late in the game that situations such as that, there will be plenty of opportunity for counterplay against this unit.
I agree. I actually do agree. I know a lot of people bring things up like, first of all, when we talk about feedback, we're talking about like Ghost versus Templar battles in StarCraft 2 and how that's really, it just kind of takes away from the action. You have these people going back and forth before the action actually finally happens. I don't think that's going to be an issue because, what are you going to feedback? Science vessels or something like that? But investing 2 Dark Templars, actually going that far, getting the research, and then morphing in a Dark Archon and hoping for feedback on maybe 1 or 2 science vessels is probably not even the best decision to make. But in a game like StarCraft 2, you have EMPs and you have Storm. Those are huge spells that have a huge effect on both armies. So I think people overestimate that. And another thing is the Maelstrom argument. Maybe they compare it to something like Fungal Growth or Force Fields. But my personal problems with with Force Fields is that it's a spammable spell. It's cheap, and it comes from a really, really cheap early game unit.
Low tier, yeah.
Yeah, if that was a unit that was more expensive and a later tier, it could actually have a better place. Force Fields could probably actually have a place. And then the thing about Fungal Growth is it's just an overlapping. It does damage. It completely stuns units, and it's also quite spammable too. And it's also from a unit that can be spammed really easily. It's not an investment where you have 2 Dark Templars. So I think that's something that people need to take consideration. And one final question about the Dark Archon: are the spells going to be researchable?
Yeah, well, currently in the test map, I believe feedback comes with the unit. The other 2 abilities, which are Mind Control and Maelstrom, they are researched. They take quite a bit of time, and they are quite expensive as well. So even if you wanted to get a full energy Dark Templar, Dark Archon with all spells in the late game, you're probably looking at least over a 500 gas, 500 mineral investment just to begin with, not to mention the time it takes for the energy to accumulate as well.
Exactly.
And then also, one more thing I'd like to tie in with this Dark Archon discussion is the flying unit that we're talking about for Zerg, the caster. We're talking about maybe Spawn Broodlings, maybe something else. Now, if people will remember, in Brood War, Spawn Broodlings did not work on Archons. This is because they were not classified as any kind of unit, which is sort of strange. I was researching this the other day. Either a unit is classified as a biological or armored or robotic. Archons, both of them, are not classified as anything. And that's why the spawn broodlings didn't work. Now, if this was by design or maybe by a little bit of mistake of Brood War, we don't know. But we were discussing, and we think maybe it would be a good idea, since this now spawn broodling is going to be on Hive Tech, to let them target Dark Icons, to give them even a little bit more of a counterplay situation for people that are maybe a little more concerned about them having too much utility with being able to lock down units. So that's something we're also in open discussion about.
Okay. I mean, I guess if I were to have a theory about that, it's just that you're using two units to morph into one another that are both very, expensive by themselves. I think that may have been a reason. Maybe it's just simply too cost effective to use spawn broodling. But okay. Anyways, it looks like we really got that out of the way.
I wanna mention one more thing about Dark Archon, if I may.
Okay.
Especially about Mealstorm, because I think Mealstorm is the one spell that people are most worried about when it comes to Dark Archon. I think a lot of people are like, no, don't add the Dark Archon, and they're thinking specifically about Mealstorm. Mind Control wasn't really used that much, and feedback is, I don't think anyone is gonna kill the Dark Archon because of feedback. Now, we were originally thinking about adding in a different spell instead of Maelstrom. We were thinking about adding a spell that is kind of like a small little vortex that forces units to the center of a point, but it doesn't make them invulnerable like they would in a normal vortex. It just forces them together, and you can kind of try to push them apart a little bit. It's kind of put a magnet in the middle. And the size and duration and everything could be tweaked, of course, but that was the general idea of the spell. And I talked to Decemberscom about this, and Decemberscom, he doesn't currently develop Starbow, but he's a very nice resource person to talk to when you have any questions, because he's very knowledgeable. And I mentioned this to him, and he actually, when he was making the race mod, which is something Jack Attack started, and some others, they had Dark Archons in that, so I could take the model from it. But he also, they were testing the exact same spell that I was mentioning in his mod, and they ended up using Maelstrom instead. And he said why. He said because people were trying to micro against this gravity pulling towards the middle so much that they weren't really microing the rest of their army instead. And it was just more frustrating than just saying, okay, these units are just frozen, I'm just going to focus on something else for a little bit. People found that just more frustrating to try to counter micro than just accepting the fact that these units are just frozen now. I just have to do other things instead, and positioning and those things. So I just took his counsel on that, and they said, okay, well, then we're just going to try the Maelstrom. At the same time, a lot of other people were telling me, yeah, no, let's just try the Maelstrom. So that kind of tipped me into that. So that's the reason we don't have. That's why we're trying Maelstrom right off the bat. Not saying that is going to end up being the spell to be, but that's the reason we're not going for that other suggestion that was out there.
Okay.
And just the last thing, yes, the AOE is a bit smaller, and if it gets to a point in the game to where if the Protoss has 6 Dark Archons and he sneaks into your army for some odd reason and Maelstorms everything without you realizing it, is your army is a lot smaller than the Protoss army. You probably lost at that point anyways. And B, he might deserve something like that if he's being sneaky with his units, and you might need to pay attention to the map a little bit more. So
I mean, that's a big investment. 2 Target Templars, the tech, the research, and wait for the energy to accumulate. That's a big deal. Big deal.
Another thing, I think, since we both have a weaker Storm and we don't have any Maelstrom in Starbow, a lot of Zerg players have gotten used to that. They can just crash in head on first into a Protoss army, and then use their unlimited unit selection to get out of Storm and just crash back in again. While in Brood War you had to be a little bit more careful. You could only move 12 units in at a time and all that stuff. So
and also
I think
maybe
a lot of Zerg players are going to learn to move smaller groups in first and bait out Storm, bait out Maelstrom, and then come in with the rest of the army and try to counter this with some good play.
And that might even promote other usage of other units instead of a mass Hydras.
Exactly. It really, the Dark Archon kind of came out of a conversation about Hydras, actually. Just to move around a little bit, if you guys want to stick on the Testmap for a second. Xiphias, do you want to mention our possible changes to the Scout?
Sure. It's not that big of a deal, really. But
could be.
Well, this is kind of going hand in hand with Sentinels. Seems to be the go-to unit for air-to-ground harassment early on. Scouts had this really weird period where people would make them early game versus Terran because they had decent ground damage. They would do explosive damage to ground. So they could
circa 4 months ago.
Yeah. So now that and we do really like that people make sentinels for ground harass and not scouts, because scouts were never really meant to harass ground early game. That's just taking one unit's role and putting it into a completely different place, and we don't want to start balancing the unit around that. So what we've been testing now is, or just recently put on the test map, is just scouts having lower cost a little bit in minerals, and remove the fleet beacon requirement, so it's earlier accessible, but then just do 8 normal damage to ground like they did in Bird War. So watching them shoot a command center now, it just looks like they're tickling it. Like they're just being brought a little bit back to their anti-armored air roll, and not.
And they're going to cost less too, right?
Yeah, 200 minerals, like I said. So
and that's cheaper than it was in Brood War, right?
Yeah, they're 275 minerals.
275 in Brood War. So they're going to be a little bit cheaper, but and come a little bit earlier. But just like you didn't see them that much in Brood War, but not have that crazy air to ground damage that we had. The people we used to call them Void Rays for a period of time. So
yeah.
Not a lot of not too much to say about that change really. It's just putting them back into a more of a niche role, but it's a role that Protoss needs, and I'm fine with not seeing scouts too often, except for when you need to make them versus Devourers or battle cruisers or whatever. But at least, you know, Protoss has the tool, they have the unit, they can do it if they needs be.
But you know, one thing that I would add is, one thing that scouts were legitimately used, stove build is one thing, or I know like you can also stack them up like wraiths, and then actually bring them back home with the shield battery, recharge the shields, and come back and keep harassing more. But now that in Starbow, you know, you have this pylon, which you can make anywhere. You know, you don't have to build a shield battery within the radius of a pylon. Yeah. You just build the pylon, cast a spell, and you can recharge energy. So that could be something that people can start using again. And also coupled with the fact that scouts cost less, but they do the same amount of damage. You know, it's a pretty big incentive to use it more again. So that's good.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty cool strategy you're mentioning there. I would like to see someone do that for the next Eurobo or something. That'd be pretty sick.
See that too.
That would be cool.
Yeah,
which is one reason why I like the Wraith too. But whatever, you know, that's a discussion for another day.
Not mention that. Let's not mention it.
Yeah, not yet. Okay, all right, we'll skip it for today. All right, the next change is no roach. So this is really interesting because I thought the roach was initially designed to counter stalkers, but now it's being removed. So what's the reasoning behind this?
Okay, I can take that one because I've been in that for a while.
Nice.
Oh yeah, man, the roach. Okay, so basically the roach we've been working on lately, and we have worked a lot on it. So removing it is kind of a big step to take. To say that it's the biggest step we can take on any unit is removing it, I guess. But
it's the last step we could take.
It's the last step at least. Well, the last step is bringing it back in. But no. So the main purpose of the roach was to make early game ZVZ more interesting than just being mass Zergling, and it was also to give Zerg something to deal with these stalkers that we're increasingly seeing more and more play in PvZ, and also becoming harder and harder to deal with, especially some really rush crazy early stalker builds. Now we found out that the roaches weren't really particularly good at any of those two things that we made. And especially to make the roaches good in early game ZVZ, they would either need some splash effect to deal with Zerglings, or they would need a lot of armor. And either one of them would have made them very dangerous early game ZVT, where they are in hatchery tech. So it just didn't fit well. And a lot of people were talking about, well, what about the Baneling? Baneling with damage, couldn't that just be... That's so much fun early game ZVZ. So that's what we're testing right now. Really, it's just, well, you know what, Baneling is an easy way to make early game ZVZ more interesting. It's a natural tech between Zergling and Mutalisk to swing in the favor of whoever has Banelings in a ZVZ early fight before Mutalisks, and the other one doesn't, is always going to have an advantage. But then he needs to do damage before the Mutalisks come out if the other guy is taking quicker. Like, you get this tension, you get this dynamic, and it's interesting. But having both Banelings and Roaches is also quite tricky, and not necessarily impossible. But here's the problem with Zerg. Zerg from Brood War is a freaking complete race. Like, it's the most complete of all the races I feel. Zerg always had it's such a complete and wonderful race, and I talked with...
The tech tree is very fluid.
Yeah, I talked to December Scum about this so many times, and he says this too, like, never add anything to Zerg. Zerg is perfect, like, and it's so hard to add things. So we don't want to like add in 2 very niche units. It's enough with 1. And so if we need, and I think ZVZ is a priority already in Protoss versus Zerg. The Stalkers now have 1 less range when they're upgraded. Their high ground vision has become an upgrade. Things have happened, so you don't really need this special unit to deal with them. You can deal with them with your normal units. You can deal with them with your Lurkers and your Hydras to a certain extent much better, and especially within Snare.
And if I can just take it real quick, I think
yeah, sure.
we learn a lot from every unit that we either put in the game or we think about putting in the game or we talk about. And I think one of the things we learned from this is that designing a unit solely around the fact that it needs to counter another unit can end up leaving a unit feeling a little bit lackluster. And so what we've taken from this is that we can make different adjustments to come to conclusions that we want to come to, rather than just designing one specific unit to deal with something.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know you guys have heard I have a lot of complaints about banelings. But I mean, I know that the idea is to make ZVZ more interesting, because there's been a lot of complaints about ZVZ being really repetitive and being a lot of Zergling versus Zergling battles. So I can see the reason behind it, and I mean, you know, it's gonna be something tough, but best of luck.
But
here's
let me take this. All right, so I understand. Baneling, it has big ramifications for not just a Zerg versus Zerg. Obviously, it has ramifications mainly for also Terran versus Zerg, and it is something that I've been thinking about. Our discussions lately have been towards things other than that, but once, at least before we add in the baneling, if we do add it in, and I won't try to belabor this point too much, it is the fact that I don't want it to have as much of an effect on Terran versus Zerg as it does on StarCraft 2. It is the go-to unit in StarCraft 2. The entire matchup revolves around Marines versus banelings, and we do have to take into account that in Starbow, we do have more of a Brood War-esque Marine, where he doesn't have instantaneous turn. He has very quick attack, and so and so adding in a baneling directly from StarCraft 2 would probably lead to some issues that we don't want to deal with. So we could either probably change around maybe some of the resource cost of banelings, which will also would give it some viability in ZVZ, right? It wouldn't make it just Zergling Wars. But then it would also make it a little bit more difficult to incorporate into a Zerg army in the Zerg versus Terran match.